Hello everyone and welcome back to yet another video on design. Today we have the Red Solstice Pirates, another faction of my fantasy setting, and today I'm going to show you yet again the process to create this image. Also I want to talk about painting from your imagination, something that people tend to ask me very frequently. Whenever they ask me something, they're either asking about figure drawing from imagination or about painting from imagination, and today I want to tackle painting since this painting was quite challenging, and I bet you can actually see it in the actual video that I'm messing around a bit more with the colors and I'm testing more things, because a lot of the colors that you see here, a lot of the materials that you see here, I didn't really paint beforehand, so I had to really think about how do I paint from imagination, and I wanted to share this with you. So let's start. So as always, we start with a little sketch. Before you can do any sort of outfit design, you have to have someone to put it on. So here you are catching a glimpse at how I create my figures. I start with a very simple gesture sketch, just very basic placement for the main masses, where the main muscles will be. Also there's a little plane on the bottom of the feet just to ground the character in somewhere. Right now it's a little bit tilted, but I will correct that afterwards. From the beginning I wanted her to be holding a dragon as if it were a hunting hawk, like some cultures around the world have had hunting birds just perched on their hands. And as you can see, right now at the beginning I'm taking the whole pirate thing very literally. And I tend to do this whenever I'm starting. I'm just trying to figure out exactly what I want the most literal way, and then start modifying from that, because I want to get these ideas out of my head so that I can have a good starting point. Also, I wanted the dragon because what's a pirate without a flying bird on their shoulder? Here I am experimenting a bit with a more Asian style of pirate that I think is not often seen. But at the end I didn't go for that one. I went for a more Mediterranean look. Here you can see I'm writing 3 words: pirate, pilots, and dragons. And those are the words I want to remember throughout the design process. Just focusing on exactly what I want this to be. And you can see I put on some goggles on her and some armor, and I draw a dragon because those are the main things I want to focus on. Everything else is just details and secondary ideas that came to me as I was drawing this. So as we are seeing here, I'm designing the face right now. This is not the face I will end up actually painting, but this is more of the feeling, the expression I want on her face. I want a relatively cocky expression, as good pirates are. In a later video I will explain my process on how I draw and paint faces and etc. Right now I just want to focus on the design since this is what I'm doing right now. As for designing imagery like the logos on her shoulder pads and how she would look like in terms of what kind of clothing would she have and stuff like that, I generally base myself on the lore of what I'm doing. I find it very hard to design an appealing character that is not based on an actual setting. Every character you draw technically has to live somewhere, and that somewhere will have a climate, and it will have things that people do in that place that will inform your decisions on what to add to this character. So you can see this is a very loose clothing, very thin clothing as well, and I'm doing it so that I can give the idea that these people live in a very hot part of the world, and in my setting these live in a desert island and they are extremely poor, and so they set off in large dragons to raid airships and stuff. So as you can see, I'm adding more of an open kind of outfit, more so than the other characters, which are all clad in very heavy armor and with plates that would be unbearable on bright sunlight. Here, everything you see me drawing here, for example, the braiding on the belt, or that little dragon head on the hilt of the sword, all of those things are details that just pop up as I'm drawing them. They are not really planned. While I'm drawing it, I'm thinking about what would make this cool, and in a few moments you will see me struggle a lot with that. So as far as drawing clothing and folds and stuff, I don't have a very strong theory or construction method about how to draw folds, but I can say that gesture drawing really helps, making sure you understand where the pressure points of the clothing is and how it would fold and flow from one place to the other. It's really helpful when drawing clothing. Here I'm just designing the dragon. I didn't like the stubby neck, so I gave it a little bit of a longer neck to a more traditional drawing. Knowing a little bit of animal anatomy is never a bad idea, but I don't think it's necessary for drawing fantasy animals. It's just like knowing how armor works. It's not necessary for drawing fantasy, but it really helps to give yourself some cool ideas. It's just like watching any fantasy movie or looking at any kind of reference material. It's just more stuff to add to your visual library. Now at this point, this is the point I struggled with a lot, is that I felt like her lower body was really lacking in some details, and actually I didn't record a long process of me just staring at the canvas because I didn't know what to add. It felt very boring, so a good tip to avoid that is to always layer your clothing. Anytime you feel like it's boring and it needs more noise, because that's something that I really associate with pirates, is they are very over the top in their clothing. So whenever you have to make something more interesting by adding more stuff, try layering. Add a coat, and over the coat add a scarf, and over the scarf add I don't know, add something else that will make the character pop a bit more and feel more exotic in some way. For example, these belts around her calves may not make a lot of sense. They actually kind of do in the sense of the setting, but not really from a literal day-to-day standpoint. At this point, I'm picking my palette, and you already know my process for painting characters. If you don't, please go check my other video on painting the Fourth Alliance soldier. I explain everything that I'm doing and how I'm thinking about it. Right now I want to talk about painting from imagination. Now, as I said, every now and then I help people that come to me asking about gesture drawing or figure drawing, and especially about painting from your imagination. And I don't have a lot of help to offer, because the way I've learned it is just do it a lot and familiarize yourself with what is going on. With this I mean that whenever you paint from reference, you don't just copy the shapes or copy the silhouette on the shadows and the tones. You need to understand why these tones and these shapes are the way they are. So if you see right now, I'm just filling in the flat colors, because flat colors will change the tone that you're starting with, and tone is the most important part of the painting. If something in the painting process looks off, it's most likely because of the tones, and you will have to, if you're in Photoshop, this is really easy, because you just have to set it to 0 saturation and it will go immediately to black and white. The same in Clip Studio Paint, which is the tool I'm using. You just go to the settings and you just turn it to black and white, and you will be able to see exactly which tones in the grayscale are you painting in. And this is very important, because if you paint with very little contrast or too much contrast in some areas, it will start to look a little bit odd. If you add color on top of it, it will be very hard to spot. So always keep in check your tones and be sure to understand why the tones are changing and how much they are changing. So if you're painting a portrait, you need to understand where the light is coming from and how it is affecting the actual subject, and how light or dark skin, for example, will change how the skin reacts to the light itself. If you see, in a little while I will start adding reflected light to this character, and since she has very dark skin, and the kind of dark skin I'm depicting here is very reflective, the actual reflected light will be very bright, almost as bright as the main light itself. So when painting for animation, you only need to really understand 5 main qualities of light, which is direct light, core shadows, reflected light, midtones, and ambient occlusion. Now I will go a little bit on this as I progress. So direct light is just where your main light is coming from. Every scene will have a main light, and if there are 2 or more lights that are exactly the same intensity shining on the object, just pick one and call it your main light. You need to have at least one place to jump off and start making assumptions from there. You start with how the light is shining. So for example, there are many different types of light sources. You have direct lighting, which is basically the light just shining directly into the object, which is called directional lighting. Basically every light ray from the light source is going in the same straight line towards the target, and it's one of the easiest ones to render from, because everything will be very neatly described by just where the light is no longer shining on the object, and this is the one I'm using on these examples that I've been uploading to YouTube. The next type of lighting would be diffuse lighting, which is really hard to comprehend for me, but it's something that I've been working on. And basically it's light rays flying in every direction and hitting every surface around them, and they start losing power as they start bouncing around. So the part of the object that is closest to the light source will be brighter than the part that is farthest away, but you will not have very definite core shadows anymore. You will not have very definite areas where there are no shadows or there are no lights. It will only be a difference in tone, very gradual, until you get basically only ambient occlusion, which will be discussed a little bit later. The next property of light is core shadow, which is basically where light transitions into lighting. So if you have a sphere and you light it with directional lighting, you will get a point in the surface where light is no longer able to reach, and that will create a line around the object that will become your core, and it's very useful to define your forms. As you can see, for example, on the breasts on this character, on her forehead, you will see a very definite place where the shadow is even darker, and that is the core shadow, is the one line that defines where the light stops shining on the object. The next point is reflected light, which you can see, for example, on her face, those pinkish tones on her forehead and on her cheeks. This is the light that will bounce around on every surface on the room and will hit your object in the shadow parts. So these are things that will raise the value of your shadows, and it will create a very strong core shadow the stronger the bounce light is. And this is a very hard thing to comprehend at the beginning, because you don't understand how much light will fall on the object and how much it will change the tones of your core shadows. But that is when practice from reference comes from. You take real objects and you study how much they change their tones and how much they are being affected by these different types of lighting, and that's how you actually start becoming more used to controlling your tones and controlling your colors. The next property I want to talk about is midtones, and midtones are really easy to understand actually. Basically, if you have only 2 tones, which is how I basically start every painting I do. I start with 2 tones, just describing light and shadow, separating those families of light. And it will look good from a distance, but the closer you get, the more you will feel like there is no real roundness to the object. So As a surface starts turning away from the light, it will start changing its tone. And so mid-tone is all the transition tones between the brightest light and the darkest dark, where your shadows start. Now the last one I wanted to talk about is actually the most complicated one to understand, and that is ambient occlusion. I've been wrestling with this concept for a long time, trying to understand how to apply it effectively and not make it overdone. And basically, I feel like I'm actually starting to understand it, and it is ambient occlusion is where the ambient light, basically the bounce light from everything in your surroundings, will not be able to reach. It is occluded from the rest of the object. So you can see the darkest accents in this piece are where the light from the environment will not be able to reach. It will be really dark in there. For example, there are creases and the armpit of the character and the place where the glove meets the other part of the leather. It will not be able to reach there because by the time a single light ray has bounced enough to get in there, it has lost a lot of its brightness. So ambient occlusion, it has a lot more to do not with the direction of the lighting, because light will bounce around everywhere you are, but more with how exposed is that surface to your environment. If there are nothing obstructing the light from shining on an object or on a piece of the object, there will not be a lot of ambient occlusion, if any. But the more you start making it into creases and the more it starts creating corners with other surfaces, the less light will be able to reach there, and that's where you start getting ambient occlusion. Now, ambient occlusion is very much overdone in some pieces, and it has to be very carefully used, and I am for sure guilty of overdoing ambient occlusion in a lot of my pieces, and I've been trying to correct that. And the thing is, ambient occlusion can get really dark. Often the darkest places of your piece will be the ambient occlusion. So try to understand that ambient occlusion is very subtle in a lot of ways. It's not going to go straight from white to black. It will create a little bit of a gradient until it goes to black only in a small fraction of that place. If it's going straight to black, it means you're most likely not even gonna see it. So be careful with that. But yeah, by understanding these 5 types of lighting that I've been talking about, you really don't have to do much else to paint from your imagination. You just have to understand this and keep reminding yourself of them as you're painting and thinking, okay, so now I've painted my direct lighting, I know where my light is coming from and what kind of light is it. How will it affect my subject? And this has a lot to do with colors and your tones. Now, tones, as I said, are the best and the most important part of your piece. If your tones are wrong, it doesn't matter how beautiful your colors combine, it will look wrong because it will not describe the 3D form. However, if your colors are not very good, but your tones are really good, it will still be a pretty decent piece. And I've been able to actually test this by having really poor color choices at the beginning of my recent year, and people still liked it. They thought it was great because I was focusing on the tones. And you can actually see this in a lot of pieces, that if you take it and reduce it to black and white only, it will still look really good because it looks realistic. The realism comes in how light interacts with the object. Now, colors, by the way, are really important. I'm not saying colors are not important, but they are not what will sell your image. Now, colors are important in one specific way to tones, and that is every color has its specific tone, which is called the local tone. And this is, for example, yellow is very bright naturally, so no matter what you do, yellow will change your tones towards a brighter spectrum. Red will change it towards a darker spectrum, and blue will be also blue can vary a lot. It's a very versatile color. But Depending on what hue you use and what colors you're using throughout your painting, is what kind of local tones you will have. So here I'm just painting spheres. These are supposed to be bombs, and I will be doing a bit more of bombiness to it in a little while. But everything I'm doing right now is just, you can see here, I'm every now and then I change everything to black and white just to check my tones, because as I said, tones are extremely important, and I cannot emphasize this enough. Tones are what you should be looking for when you're painting in color. Even if it sounds really counterintuitive, the more you focus on tones, the better your image will turn out. A lot of my early images are very jarring to the eye, and sure, they will look very bright and very colorful and very cheery, but as you start comparing them to, so if I get that image, one of my early images, that is very colorful but very bad in tones, and I just correct the tones and put it one side by side, people will most likely prefer the one that has correct tones, because it just looks better. Perhaps people that are not very very versed in art or very used to doing art themselves, they will not be able to point out what is wrong about a piece with bad values, but if they see the comparison, they will most likely be able to say which one is better. So when I was starting out, I was not sure, I wasn't able to really see the difference between good and bad values, and that is something that is corrected through training and through practice. You may have heard a lot of times artists just say practice, 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 and that is really the key here. It sounds very, very cliche and very like, I don't want you to know my secret, so I will only tell you to practice. But really, there's no way around it. You have to practice these things and really know what I'm talking about, because just explaining it, even if I was just making a completely 100% tutorial video just showing you and demonstrating every single thing I've just said, will probably not even if you agree with what I say, you're probably not even grasping how important they are. And because this happened to me when I was starting out, I was aware of the importance of tones. I was aware of the importance of clear shapes, of defining forms through direct light and the 5 elements of light and everything. But I didn't really understand its importance until I started actually thinking about these things and actually practicing consciously to do these kind of exercises where I am painting objects with this mentality, with the mentality of breaking light down into its core foundational steps. Now there are people, of course, that are very good at lighting and will not need to practice a lot because they just kinda understand lighting, and I want to tell you, there's nothing wrong if you don't understand it the first time. A lot of times people get discouraged by watching people that seem to have a lot of natural ability for it, and sure, there are people that have a very good eye for certain things, for colors or for shapes. I happen to be relatively good at structure. I can think about structure all day long, no problem, and just break things down into basic shapes. However, one thing I really sucked at was colors, and if you go through my DeviantArt page to my old folder, which I do not encourage you to do because it will be awful and very embarrassing for me, but if you do, you will see that I never painted in colors, and the few pieces I have in colors there are horrible, are really, really weird looking, because I wasn't understanding these these kind of ideas of how to use color. And I used to get very very discouraged by these things, but it will get better the more you practice it. I am right now, I am fairly comfortable painting from my imagination. I am still a long ways from learning everything I want, and I still have a lot of things that I need to get better at, but I am at a point right now where I can just advise some things that have worked for me to improve, and I will still apply them to keep improving in the future. So yeah, just remember that no one was born knowing everything, and that it doesn't matter if you don't know, because what's the point of learning if you already know how to do something? You just gotta keep training and keep working hard, because even if you don't have the natural ability to do something, which most of us don't have the natural ability to do a lot of the things we like to do, you can always just put the effort and it will at the end pay off. I can assure you that, because it has worked for me that way. So here you can see as well, in this painting I am just zooming in and out and rotating the canvas a lot. Um, I am I'm trying to make sure that I'm not missing any details, because this painting really asked a lot of me. It asked me to really think harder about my subject and about how I was gonna apply colors and how I was gonna apply my materials, and so it is, I think, that the methods I discuss here, so like starting very far away and never zooming in until I have to do details and just keep zooming in until I finish everything, or just breaking things down to 5 simple layers and then just merging them together. Those are really useful when you're trying to explain how you think and how you paint, but when you're actually painting it, you don't want to be constrained by the method. You don't want to just be able to paint if you have 5 layers and they are in the right order and they are labeled correctly. You want to be able to actually be a little bit more free and be able to improvise if you need to. So when I am painting like this, I am thinking about these processes, I'm thinking about these principles, but I'm not being a slave to them. I'm not allowing it to take control of how I create my pieces, because otherwise they will become boring. They will become very formulaic. They will just be the same kind of painting, the same kind of light structure all the times, and I want a little bit more variation. The best painters, to me, in my opinion, the best painters, the ones I follow and the ones I try to emulate, always have this very crazy variation in the work. Even that, and they look realistic. They look really good. You see, John Singer Sargent. He has a very realistic approach, but he's most likely not breaking things down into 5 layers. I don't even know how many layers he used. I would say he probably used only one a la prima style in some of his paintings. So here in this drawing you're seeing more of my normal step-by-step approach. I am first separating light and shadow into two tones, and now I'm adding the half tones. Then in a moment I'm going to start adding the reflected light and then the occlusion shadows, and then I will do one extra step that I want to talk about when we get there. So here, right after I am painting occlusion shadows on the wings and giving it the feather look on the folds, you're gonna see me starting to apply an orange tint on the wing, and this is what is called subsurface scattering. This is a very complicated thing that I'm not going to go into in this video, but these are material specific steps that I use for specific areas of the painting. If you saw me painting the ear earlier on the girl, you probably will notice that I paint a lot of warm tones on her ear, and they're brighter than they should, and that is because I am thinking about how light hits translucent objects like ears or wings that are very thin and will most likely let some light through them. Now I'm just generally adding some details to the dragon's face because it looked a bit dull. So overall, a very challenging painting, a very exciting subject. I really like fantasy, and I really like fantasy settings with lots of lore, and I really enjoyed doing these little videos for you guys. So if you want to help me keep these videos coming your way, if you want to support my art, you can follow me on DeviantArt, Twitter and Instagram, now also ArtStation. The links are in the description area below, and if you want to support me, please consider going to patreon.com/DanielPinalArts. There you can find these videos 2 days earlier. You can suggest ideas for the next illustrations. You can get commissions every month, and you can also get high resolution images for these illustrations. So it's win-win for everyone, and every dollar really helps to keep me motivated to make this. So great one, guys. I will see you next time. Bye.